Alright, my name is Nathan and I'm with Critter Performance, and today we are going to do an RB25DET teardown. We're going to start with just taking off all the manifolds and disassembling all the accessories, get the head off. Eventually the motor is probably going to get be an RB28 stroker. We just going to get to that point eventually, just kind of working with it now. But we will eventually compare our RB25 Neo to both our Series 1 RB25 and our RB30 that we have back there, just so there's a more comprehensive video of all the differences between the heads on the Series 1 and the Neo, and then the block differences between the 25 and the 30, and then some of the modifications you have to do to the RB30 block to make it compatible with the RB25 head to do a dual overhead cam RB30. So we'll go ahead and jump right into it and get the manifolds ripped off, and we'll go from there. Alright, so first we're going to start with taking off our turbo before we take off the manifold. Wrench sizes will be dependent on what you've got set up. I mean, I've got a 14 and a 15 size nut. Depends on what you got to do to get around the exhaust housing. We're currently running an HTZ Super 99. A little big for what we were doing, but it was a lag monster, but when it hit good. Got a good deal too, so couldn't help but run it. We'll grow into the turbo eventually. When we do the stroker, it'll definitely be what we need to do there. So we'll just rip off the 4 bolts. Sometimes, depending on your turbo, might have to take the back side of the turbine housing off just to get at this inside bolt. Luckily, we can get in there with a wrench and get it swung off there. But we'll go ahead and rip that apart now. So now we got the turbo off. Now I always recommend when you got a turbo off for a build, I mean, if it's only been on there 2 weeks, whatever, don't worry about it. But if the turbo's been in service for at least a season, you know, might get your dial indicator out, check for shaft play in and out, make sure your seals are good, make sure there's no damage to any of the housings, make sure it's all tight. You've got it apart, might as well do it. Save your engine in the long run if it goes. Now we're going to take off our manifold. Now this is nothing fancy, it's just a generation like Uno number 1 CX Racing manifold. It's hold up pretty good. It's fallen off the engine stand, hit the ground once and it's still going. And then you're always going to want to check for cracks when you're doing these, especially with a cheaper manifold. Now, if you had some $3,000 manifold, it's probably not going to crack, but this thing probably only cost maybe $1,000 when it was brand new. So check it for cracks. Once again, it's easier to fix it now while it's apart than when it's on the car. So usually it'll be, I think it's 14 mil all the way across. There's, geez, how many are there? There's 12 of them. 12 bolts, take them off, pull it off, be done with it. exhaust manifold all done, we are going to start the intake manifold. Now all you should need is a 12 mil. Usually you can get it with a really nice long extension and a 12 mil swivel socket. You can get just about all of them across the bottom. This is not a stock intake manifold, of course. It is a Freddy intake manifold, because who's paying Gretty prices for something that does something so simple? So the stock one's a lot more pain in the ass to get off. You got that comes over the top. It's 2-piece. Lots of stuff underneath. This one's pretty much well deleted. It's got some of the standard evap and stuff underneath it. All the coolant lines in it are deleted, I believe. But other than that, it's got the swirl valve underneath. But like I said, it's 13 12 mil bolts. Zip them all out, pull it off. It's pretty self-explanatory. Alright, so I lied when I took off the intake manifold and said it was all bolts. There is one stud down here. If you leave the stock bolt from the factory, it is a stud back here, so you might need a wrench instead of just the swivel socket. But I mean, if you want to put a bolt in there, it comes right out. There's no reason to have it a stud. I just didn't feel like finding hardware when I put the other intake on. So now we're gonna take off our accessories. We're gonna get the rest of the sides of the block stripped down, and then we'll work on taking parts of the head off. But first we'll start with the alternator and your thermostat bracket here. Maybe we'll take the sensors off the side of the block. We'll start with this side and then we'll work our way over to the other side and get it stripped. Now this block has been sitting for a hot minute, but it has definitely got some rust buildup in the cooling system. Now we got this motor from an importer a couple years ago, so rust could be due to either, you know, just not having the right coolant mixture in it, not using distilled water. We definitely ran the right coolant mixture in it, straight 50-50 out of the bottle. Don't like to take any chances of mixing it. You don't have to buy distilled water that way. I do have a chemical that we will probably run through the block, both pre-machine and after we get it running. I can show you guys a chemical that I like to use on a running engine. That way you can get the rest of the system. Worked really good. We had to do that on our II Z project because the block we got secondhand was a little crusty on the inside, but it works wonders. That way your system actually cools like it's supposed to. This dipstick is just pressed into the block. It's just got a couple of O-rings on the bottom. You're gonna grab your favorite chisel. This is not a screwdriver, this is actually a chisel. You're gonna get underneath the edge of it, get a little glove cap. It's gonna come out. Yeah, just like that, she pops out. Not super hard to deal with. Guess I was mistaken on the O-rings though. I guess it's been a while since I had a dipstick out on these, but it's just pressed in there. Maybe when you put it in, if you're really worried about it, put a little RTV around the hole just a tiny bit, but otherwise, as far as that flange is, they're about 1 inch. I don't think you're gonna have any oil come back up if you just pound it back in. Next, we're gonna zip off the motor mounts. Usually it's just 4 14 mil bolts. Factory, not really sure, it's been a day or two, but I'm pretty sure it's just the 4 bolts. 14 mil head. Should just come right out, no problems. Take this coolant hose off here. Nothing spectacular. If you know how to work a screwdriver, you'd be okay. Most of your coolant lines, especially if you've got still like factory original coolant hoses, I would definitely recommend buying some new hoses. I mean, most of the stock RB25 coolant system, you're probably gonna delete, modify. I mean, this one's got all the added coolant lines pinched off and welded. Same with right here. We deleted the throttle body coolant, a lot less leaks to happen. I mean, you need 4 hoses on your coolant system. Well, unless you're running a water-cooled turbo, but otherwise you need one to the bottom of the radiator, one to the top of the radiator, one to the heater core if you're running a heater core, one back from the heater core. That's it. Otherwise, delete the rest of that. You don't really need it. Alright, next, now that we've got the coolant lines off the side of the block, we're going to go ahead and just take these sensors out over here. These are a stock RB25 knock sensor. If you're going with some kind of stock tuning format, you know, use them. If you've got a plug and play, you can use them. Otherwise, I prefer when you're going with aftermarket standalone ECU, just to go ahead and go with a wideband style knock sensor, Bosch unit. You can get a stud kit. They literally bolt right into the stock location. Really great, makes it easier for tuning. They pick up a lot more different resonances than what the stock one, because the stock one is a narrow band knock sensor and it is tuned for the exact pitch and change. And so if you're changing pistons and stuff like that, the noises aren't going to be the same as what it's looking for, and you can pick up a lot more with the wideband one. And your aftermarket ECUs love the wideband knock sensor. It's super easy to tune, but it's just a 24 mil. You can use a wrench if you can get on there. They're not usually super tight, but otherwise 24 mil socket. Just got to use a deep one so you can get past the connector on there. Or if you're not going to use them, break off the plastic and use a short socket if they're on there really tight. Alright, so we're done with the passenger side. We got everything stripped off the side of the block except for one little coolant nipple, but it's going to stay there anyways. So all we got on this side after you've got the exhaust manifold off is you've got usually your turbo feed. You'd have a turbo drain down here. Already got the drain out of it because we had to sacrifice it for another build. Got the motor mount take off, 4 bolts, same as the other side. It's super easy. Power steering, depending on what you've got going on for a power steering setup, 99% of them are going to be this style. You have just 3 14 mil bolts on the backside, unbolt and take it off. Super simple. Alright, some other features you might have to work with on this side of the block. You do have 2 locations you could deal with the drain. We got here or here, depending on what turbo setup you're running. If it's twin turbo setup, you know, use both drains. You have to. Oil feed, I believe you have the 1 location for oil, and then back here you've got 2 locations for coolant. If you're running a water-cooled turbo. This one's got a plug in it, and this one's just got a welded fitting on it to keep the coolant from leaking out. But now we can, I'd say, start by taking off the coil packs and get the valve cover off. Now, my coil packs are a little different than what your standard are. I've got kind of a special setup. Running an Audi R8 coil. It looks nice with the way I've got the cover cut. It does kind of make it kind of a pain in the butt, but how often are you taking off the cover to get at the coils anyways? So Now, if you want to come over here and look at this, it's a little easier to tell you, or show you than to tell you. As you can see, I've got the wires stuffed up through here, and it's kind of a tight fit. But if you put it in at exactly the same time, it goes right in, and they don't come out. But unless you change the spark plugs all the time. But if you got your tune dialed in, you shouldn't be chewing through spark plugs anyways. So I'm just gonna pop them all, launch them across the room. Is what you're gonna do, and that's a new coil right there. These are authentic Audi R8 coils. I've had better luck with the authentic ones than I have the eBay ones or the Amazon ones. But the performance on the QYL from Amazon are pretty decent. I haven't had any use with them on high horsepower, but I don't have any spark blowout with these. They work great with all your aftermarket ECUs. Super cheap to come by for the power level you get. Not as nice as like an R35 coil, but you don't have the price of the R35 coil because you don't have to do adapter bracket to fit it in there, and then you just don't have the general cost of the R35 coil. Especially if you're doing something lower horsepower that you just want a coil upgrade. And you can also do these with a stock PTU delete. You can do them on Nissans. Done a few on Nissan 300ZXs and RB20s. Stuff like that to get rid of the stock PTU and run some cheaper coils just to run stock power and get rid of that nasty Nissan PTU setup. So we'll get the rest of these off here and get working on the valve covers next. So we got the coil packs out. We are going to then take out the little bolts. There are 8 of them. Mine happened to be a 4mm. Not really sure on what the stock size Allen key is, or if it is an Allen at all. I haven't had my hands on an unmolested one, so I would not know what the stock bolt would be. So take them out, pull the cover off, and then start doing the valve covers after that. Just gotta get this out of the way because it bridges the gap in between them. Alright, so before I do the valve covers, I'm going to go ahead and take the front end off this thing. So we'll turn it top dead center, make sure that's all in place. Zip the crank pulley off, zip the front timing covers off, take the belts off. Then we'll go ahead and pull the valve covers off. Now you can take the valve covers off without doing all that. It's just the order in which I wanted to do it. So start with 10mm, get your cache sensor off there. This one is already loose. Just 3 bolts and slotted holes all there on the outside edges, and just pull her out. Now if you're lucky enough to have this style spline, it should be the newer style sensor, the plastic cap, it'll have this style spline. Otherwise they've got this star spline all there on the inside edge that locks into the cam, and there's a little flat in there that likes to get broken off. If you've got that style and that flat's broken off on either the cam side or on the sensor side, then you've got to kind of pay attention to where you pull that out of. You can save yourself a lot of heartache if you can get it put back right in the same spot. But otherwise, they do make a kit to replace the dongle on the cam to make sure it lines back up, or just get a new sensor with a new thing on that side if it's the other way around. Alright, now we're going to take the crank pulley off. Don't have a metric socket, it's 1/16. If you do, it's 27. Set it at the top dead center. It's probably going to spin a little bit backwards. Otherwise, if it's really on there, put something on there to hold it. I know this one's not on there super tight, so I'm just going to crack it with the impact ones to get it off. Didn't even move. So, another thing you should inspect when you take it off, make sure there's no galling Make sure your washer's still there. Now this bad boy coming off is probably gonna give us a little bit of a fight. It may come right off. Yeah, it's gonna be one of those. A lot of times you can take and just kind of hit it on the backside edges and get it off. I think this one's probably gonna need a puller though. Not trying to beat the snot out of it, you're just giving a little love tap on the backside. Back and forth, see if it'll move. I don't think this one's gonna move though. So we'll grab a puller of some sort and get it off there. Alright, since our pulley doesn't want to come off, and a lot of your ones you're gonna import are probably gonna be like that, put this to get this off here. We're gonna put our bolt back in, not all the way tight, but not loose. We want it in there quite a few threads, almost half the threads. And then we're gonna start it moving with this, and once we get it moving, it should come right off. You spray a little penetrating lube around the outside edge of the shaft. Doesn't matter your brand. Just a little bit around the outside edges. Thread your bolt in. We want the bolt threaded in there far enough that it's not, you don't want all that wiggle side play in there. We don't want it to side shift the bolt and tear the threads in the crank. Get it in there. We just want to start moving it, so just have it butted up, 1/16 of an inch off of the backside there. Right. So once you've got your bolt threaded in there, set about 1/16 of an inch off the backside of the crank pulley. Gonna put your 3-jaw on. Usually you can position the 3-jaw, it'll just miss the timing cover so you can get an even grab all the way around. Otherwise you can use a 2-jaw across both sides. Or there are 2 small bolt holes. I believe they're an M8 125 thread pitch. Not 100% sure. I haven't used that in a while to pull it out with a different style puller. But otherwise, 3-jaw is the way to go. Put it on the bolt. Like I said, once it starts moving, it should come right off. Like I said, once it starts moving, it comes right off. Should be able to take your bolt out, give it a little tug now, and it should come off. If it persists to not want to come out, take your washer off of the bolt, give yourself just a little bit more pulling room, and stuff it back in about the same distance, hit it with the 3-jaw again, it should come off. Now if it really doesn't feel like it wants to go anymore, should be able to just give it a little wiggle if it wants to come. Don't think it wants to. And use the hammer again. Just kind of work it back and forth. Or we're going to put the bolt back in. Oh man, but that's how it goes. I've had this one off here and I put grease on it too. Can you believe that? And it still doesn't want to come off? Thread your bolt back in without the washer on it this time. Set your 3-jaw up again. Wrench back on it, tighten it down. Yeah, there it goes. Just didn't quite want to come off that keyway. Right down. Very important, if you pull this, there is what we call a crank key stuffed on the, cutting a groove right here on the snout of the crank. You want to make sure we don't lose that. Try to move it with your fingers. If it doesn't want to come out, it's probably rusted in there. Probably best off just leaving it. Otherwise, you can tap it out and get it out. But I would rather, if it's rusted in there or stuck on there, don't play with it, just leave it. It won't fall out. But if it is loose like this one's been greased and cleaned. Don't drop it on the floor. Put it somewhere safe. You'll need it to make sure your crank balancer stays on there. Now you're going to want to inspect this. This one is a prime example of what not to use. This one, as you can see, has large pieces missing off the pulley here. The rubber itself is also starting to separate down in here. It's really hard to see. You can see the inner and outer section are separated by a piece of rubber. That's what helps dampen it, but there are large chunks missing out all over the face of this. So this needs to be replaced. We just ran it just because that was all we had and it wasn't in the car very long, but definitely do not recommend reusing this. Alright, so now we got the lower crank pulley off. We can start taking our covers off. You got 2 Allens up here, 5 mil. You've got miscellaneous tins all the way around the outside edge and around the lowers here. 10 mil head, that is, M8 bolt. But yeah, just loosen them up, pop the covers off. It's pretty self-explanatory, guys. So after you get your upper and lower covers off, next thing, probably go ahead and take this your lower belt guide off. This keeps the belt from walking back and forth. Your lower timing gear has one lip on it. This is the other side, keeps the belt where it needs to be riding. Now just to verify that we are at top dead center still, because now we don't have the crank pulley out of the front cover to look where it's at. There is a dot on this lower gear. We have Bob come in here and give us a close-up.
After I make all this noise.
Hold on, yeah. Get in here. But there's a little dot, I've got it marked in red paint marker from the last time I had this part, and then there's a little tiny notch right here in the lower part of the oil pump. You can just see it right there. You're just gonna make sure those are still lined up. That means we're still at top dead center. Safe to take apart, not gonna injure any valves or anything. So, yeah. Now we can go ahead and take our timing belt off, and then we can start working on the head. All right, to take off the timing belt, you've got a 14 mil here on this idler, or this is technically a tensioner. This is your idler. But there's an Allen to adjust the timing belt. We'll go over that when we go put one of these back together. We've got 3 of them that need to be put back together. So we'll do a video on it when we put it back together, setting the timing. But for now, we're just gonna take and break this thing loose. And then this should just move around. It's got a spring on it. Nothing super heavy to overcome though. But you can just hold it up and pull your belt off. Just come right off. Now, remember at this point, folks, do not roll the engine over. Don't turn your cams over. Don't do anything. We have the timing belt off. There is the chance that you could turn the crank and put a piston into a valve. So just be aware of that before you take the timing belt off. If you need to move it, you could have a problem. I already have a plan in my head what's going on, so I'm going to go ahead and just take this off just for video's sake. Now we are going to take our valve covers off. There are 10 mil bolts along the perimeter. How many are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we've got 10 on each valve cover. Just going to zip them off. They may be silicone down, so you may have to do just a little bit of love tap to get them up, but otherwise they should just pop right off, and then we can unbolt our head and go from there. Oh, I also forgot to mention, just kind of over my head for a second there, but when you're setting your bottom mark there, make sure you're top dead center. Make sure that you're also making sure that your upper cam marks, that way you're on the right stroke of the engine, to make sure that your holes line up for your getting your head off. Otherwise your cams will be out and you won't be able to fit in there to get the head bolts out. So yeah, just double check your marks. There's two mark on either side of the upper timing cover. They'll line up with 2 marks on your cams. So now that we've got that out of the way, valve covers are off, we can go ahead and start loosening up our head. Gonna do it in the same order that you put one on. You always start from the inside out. I usually just do a 1/4 turn at a time just to break them loose. Just give it a little bit until you don't feel any tension on them, and then you can go ahead and take the impact to it and zip them off the rest of the way to make it easier. I'll just slide the head off. Alright, so ordinarily you would be able to come in here and come past your cams and get your head bolts loose. There's a cutout in each one of the cams to loosen that up. We do have aftermarket ARP studs in here, and as you can see, our socket does not clear because the sheer size, some of these it does, some of these it doesn't. The sheer size of the socket to get on the head of the larger ARPs does not clear. So we are going to have to take the cams out to get our head off, but ordinarily with a standard RB25 stock head bolts, you would not have to do that. But we are going to have to do it this time. So I guess we will go ahead and probably pop our cam gears off, and then we will pull all the cam caps off and take the head off. Alright, so we've got the exhaust cam off, or the exhaust cam gear off. It's you just got to take your cast bracket off, which is 3 12mm head bolts. Take all 3 of those off there. You got to wiggle a little bit. There's 2 dowels that are stick it, and it doesn't want to come off right away, so you just wiggle it back and forth. It should come right off. Then you've got 4 11mm head bolts. They made it kind of an oddball on the cam gear on this side, so you just zip those out. And then same thing, wiggle the head a little bit. Then you've got over here, you've got for your cam control, you've got a little cap in the head of this. It takes an 8mm. Somebody else has had the wrench in there and messed up the head of it. Usually got to pound it in there. 8mm stuck in there now. I'll have to get it out in the vise later. Then it should just be a 10mm. Down inside there's a bolt in there. I don't recommend just putting the impact on it and then hitting it right away, because we don't want our cam to try to rotate when we hit it, because there's usually quite a bit of torque on there, and we just don't want to hit any valves in the piston. So we'll get a wrench on here. Should be a, well, oh yeah, flat's up here. So you'll have to use the cutouts on the cam as a flat, just because there's no actual flat on these ones. Well, there is, but it's harder to use with the angle you're at. So right here at the face of it, there's a flat cut into the can right here that you can put a wrench on. So we're just going to put a wrench on it right there. Crescent wrench works great. You should be able to just, or not. That fails. Usually it just needs a little more grunt than it does vibration. Put your wrench on there. Just turn it loose. Didn't take too much, just need a little more than the impact is willing to give it. Should just come right off there. This one had some gunk built up around the back of it, but ordinarily your bolt would just come off. This one had some Loctite built up around. It was a little excessive back there, so it just kind of acted like a puller and pulled the gear off. probably won't have that happen very often. But same thing with the other one, just rock it back and forth, it should slide right off. Alright, now that you have your cam gears off, we're just going to take this rear timing cover off. It's just a couple of 10 mils. You got one here, one here, one here, and one here. Comes right off. You didn't see it good enough earlier. There is your marks for your cam gears. I like to take a little white paint marker and put on there, something really nice and easy to see. Now that we have our front cover off, we're going to take the cams off. Now, you need to be careful when you're doing this because some of these valves are compressed. So we will need to release the pressure on the cam evenly. We want it to be even. That way we don't, put any stress on the cam or bend the cam in any way. So we will basically do the same way you do the head. Start from the inside, slowly work our way out. Just a corner turn at a time until you feel no tension on all the threads. Then you can take it out the rest of the way. But first you've got to take off these rear splash guards. These you can just take off, no problem. They're just 10 mil bolts because the rear ones are studs instead of a bolt. So you just take and zip them off right away. we've got the cams out, we can safely get to our head studs and loosen them all. Like I said, I'll start with a quarter turn each one, working inside out like a normal pattern like you would do to put the head on. And then once you get all of them loose enough that you can just spin them by hand, you can go ahead and just take the impact through there and zip them out the rest of the way. Alright, now once you get them all zipped loose, the impact, especially if you're running a stud, you're going to have to come back through and catch all your nuts. Ones you're going to have to they're really a pain in the ass. You should try to catch them when you're taking them loose as the front two and then the back two, because there's a large void in the front and back of the head where they can fall down in, and it kind of makes them fun fishing back out. May even have to wait till that one comes off. Oh, there we go. Maybe. Might just wait till that comes out. Feels like that one stud kind of spun out a little bit. Yeah, we'll wait to come back to that one. But so it's the same thing in the back. There's a void back there. Kind of makes them, they fall down into it. You go ahead and grab all of your nuts. This one, stud came out with. Alright. You can grab all your washers if you want to at the same time if you've got a small enough pin magnet. Otherwise, I usually just wait until it's on the bench. Easier to grab when the stud's not in there. So, if everything is off, now there is a couple of spots I'm going to have Bob bring the camera in so I can show you that you need to make sure you have off before you try to pull the head off, because if you're messing with a bone stock RB, it's going to have a few bolts that you're not going to think to pull out. There's one bolt right here in the front, right above the water pump. There's a little 10 mil bolt that would go in there, or 8 mil thread, 10 mil head. And then there's another one back here. Same thing on the back side of the block. And then there's one more on this side. You gotta make sure you get all those out of there, otherwise you will be fighting with it to get it loose. So you've got those 3 little bolts you need to make sure you get off. Then it should just come right off. Now, yeah, just give it a tug up. Now if it needs a little bit of love with the hammer, not the end of the world. My gasket is apparently glued pretty good, causing me some binding issues. There we go. Gasket was hung up in the studs, no big deal. Now when you lay that head down, just make sure you don't lay it on the sealing surface. If you do, I usually put a piece of cardboard underneath it. Try not to tip it all the way over on its head if you had to take the cams out, because the buckets will try to slide out on the one side if you do lay it on its side. So I usually just slide a piece of cardboard underneath it and then set it down. I'll set it down on a rough surface. You don't want to make any dents or scratches on that sealing surface if you don't have to. Now the head will get decked before it gets put back on, but we don't want to have to take off any extra material that we don't have to. So just be careful with it when you set it down. Now we can go ahead and take out our studs. Should most of the time just spin right out. Not a huge deal. Sometimes you gotta get you an Allen key, like that one's tight. Don't lose your dowels either. Should be a dowel on, I think just the front corner on these ones. I believe. Yeah, just on the front corner, right above the first hole should have a dowel on it. The rest of them should be fine.
Is another dowel?
Oh yeah, there's one back here too. Yeah, one back here on the back side as well.
Squeeze behind you.
Then another thing is really cool about an RB. It doesn't have a traditional like an oil galley that lines up with a oil hole on the head. It actually oils through around this main stud or head stud. The oil comes in. If Bob will come over here with the camera, I can show you the little cutout where the oil goes around. The oil actually comes up right through here out of the block. So this is the stock restrictor for the oil. Now these will get changed when we do when we build it back up. We will put a smaller restrictor in there just so we don't have so much oil in the head. We'll probably blank off the rear one on this one because I do have solid lifters, so I don't have hydro lifters, so we don't have to worry about as much oil needed in the head. That'll help with some of the oil pooling issues. But the oil actually, if you look at the sealing surface on here, you can see the little oval. The oil comes up and it hits the head, and then it travels around the head stud into the head. So this little, you can see where the gasket was sealing. The oil actually goes up and over and around that head stud into the head. So you want to make sure that your sealing surface around these head studs is perfect. You don't want any of your oil pressure squeezing out past it. Now, of course, these are head studs, so we can reuse them. But one thing that does need to be checked on them before we reuse them is they need to be cleaned. One, get everything off of them, and then we need to measure them to make sure they aren't stretched. We will normally, when you put them in the first time, you measure, make sure, write down all your measurements, and then double check them when you bring them out the second time. Just a good idea to make sure none of your head studs are stretched. Ordinarily, if I get one that's stretched, I'm just going to go ahead and replace the whole lot. ARP says that if they're not stretched, you can't technically reuse them, so you could order one single stud, but if you got one that's stretched, who's to say the rest aren't fatigued? I'd just go ahead and order another set. It's a cheap piece of insurance. Your dowels, ordinarily, if they don't fall out, it's pretty easy to just get on them. You can usually just grab them, pull them right out. Otherwise, needle nose really gently. Just grab it, give it a little wiggle. Should come right out. Don't want to damage them. We don't want them to mar up the aluminum head when we put them back in. So we'll just clean them up, make sure there's no burrs on them. They need to fit snugly in both the block and the head. But once again, this is just like that keyway. You don't want to lose them because we need to put them back on when we put the head back on. So safe place for these usually with your head studs if you're using head studs pulling down a motor, or just make sure they get put away where you can find them. Alright, so something else that we need to talk about is the fact that a lot of people neglect to get the block surface correctly for the stock gasket they're running. Now, stock RB25 comes with a composite style gasket made out of graphite and all sorts of stuff with a metal sealing ring around the cylinder. Now the surface for that does not need to be as smooth and or flat as what an MLS gasket requires. So most of the time the block is overlooked, and if you look here on this block, you can see where the original graphite gasket was actually sitting. Like you can see the grooves where the graphite was sitting in it, and you can see where the original sealing ring was. So this did have an MLS gasket on it, but it wasn't running high boost. You get into higher boost applications, that is a problem. Now there can be, I've seen blocks decked, the factory finish will be sometimes off by thousandths from corner to corner, and that does affect your sealing. Now, for optimum sealing, you should get the block decked. You can have machine shops to do it with the pistons in it. It's not really recommended because you're still gonna have to clean the whole block out anyways. So take the whole block down, get the block surfaced correctly, get your head surfaced correctly. The stock sealing surfaces are not made for MLS gaskets. Needs to be a nice smooth finish. Doesn't have to be a mirror finish. Like Nitto gaskets don't recommend a mirror finish, but they do recommend a higher grade finish than what the factory gasket finish is. So today we took off the head off our RB25DET Neo. Next time we will be disassembling the bottom end. We'll go through what we want to see and what we don't want to see. But that is all we have for this video, so I would like to thank everybody for watching, and if you guys could go over to our Facebook and Instagram at Critter Performance and give us a like, and then maybe share and subscribe to our channel on YouTube, that'd be great.